Oh, I can, yes. All right, should I start again? Okay, that's it. We've been rushing to put all the gear together. So my name's Matthew. Oh, okay, right, I get you. There you go. That's it. I was in Switzerland and Italy yesterday. That's it. So my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute, the World Futures Forum, and Exponential University. The 311 Institute looks at two kinds of futures. So we look at the next 20 years, because if you're a multinational organization, that's typically where you spend a lot of your time. So whether it's the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, or 20 years. And if you're a sovereign government, typically you sort of think, you'd like to think they'd think a little bit longer term, 20 to 50 years, particularly when we talk about the future of education, jobs, skills, transportation, media, telecoms, obviously, healthcare, the welfare state, taxes, taxation, and everything else. Now, the World Futures Forum works with the United Nations, where we try to solve all of the United Nations SDGs, and we actually have solutions for every United Nations SDG, which is maybe a conversation for another time. And I also run Exponential University, which seems to be the world's first metaverse-based school for 8-year-olds and up. We launched about 6 months ago. Really, when we talk about the metaverse, it's virtual reality. We found that students have a retention rate of 64%, an improvement over traditional education. And the reason why I started XPU is for the simple reason that, as you'll see through this presentation, our industrial age education system, most organizations don't think is adequately preparing students for actually what's here, let alone what's coming. So that's me in a nutshell. Now, one of the things I try to do is democratize access to the future. Now, the reason I do that is, having worked at organizations like IBM, Atos, EMC, these kinds of organizations, the vast majority of organizations might be able to see the future. They might not necessarily be able to understand what it means for their own organizations, and they may or may not be able to put the right visions and strategies in place. So with organizations like IBM, when we saw the advent of cloud and the rise of Microsoft Azure, but also Amazon, we saw over 50,000 people being cycled out of the organization because IBM reacted too late and kind of in the wrong way, which then chopped their market value and their revenues almost in half. So we have the Technology and Trends Codex. If you scan the QR code, you can get access to these, and the Exponential Technology Codex. Now, from my perspective, I typically work with Fortune 50 organizations, really dropping down to Fortune 250. My average clients range in the revenues of about $20 to $300 billion. So that's organizations like Samsung, Arm, Microsoft that we've had in the room, organizations like Aon, Willis Towers Watson, Pepsi, as well as companies like Visa. What we typically find is, from a Western perspective, most organizations are now starting to take a longer term view of the future, typically sort of 10 years. Some are stretching between 20 to 50 years if you have a look at organizations like Henkel. However, over in China, where I do a lot of work with Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, and those sorts of organizations, they start at 50 years and then rewind from there. And so when we look at the West versus the East, there are fundamentally different attitudes and approaches to what they think about the future, how they view the future, and then how they go and dominate it. Now, if you're a CEO, CXO, there are lots of technologies and trends coming at you. There is a lot of change happening around you. Now, when I ask audiences how much time they really spend looking at the future in any capacity, we're generally lucky if people spend a day a month, or a day a quarter, or even in some cases, any time throughout the year. So when you have a look at all these are the mega trends that are affecting different industries, different back office and front office functions, as well as societal, technological, environmental, economic, and political mega trends. All of these are changing lots of things. But then when we have a look at technologies, bearing in mind there are over 300 exponential technologies, from a board perspective, you're seeing the change happen outside. You're seeing all these trends developing and coming at you, affecting you whether it's directly or indirectly. You then see the rise of all these different technologies whether it's artificial intelligence, blockchain, virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D printing, and so on and so forth. And while this is information on the future, trying to piece all of these different things together to understand what it means for you at an individual level, a professional level, a sectorial level, or even a country level is incredibly difficult. So I kind of refer to this as these are the jigsaw pieces. And when we're trying to put our visions of the future together, we don't really know what that jigsaw looks like. So we're kind of taking a best guess, and we're hoping that we can jam all these pieces in the right place to create a picture that makes a bit of sense. And then off we go and run. So when we start combining these technologies and trends together, one of my clients is Citi, and they always like formulas. We end up with an infinite set of futures. The plausible, possible, preposterous, and probable future. So for example, one of my clients, Pepsi, we recently talked about the ability to use 3D printed metamaterials to create completely new kinds of chocolates, something that Unilever are already doing. And yet that would fit in the preposterous bucket. If we think about COVID, if we were talking 10 years ago and said, well, we think the world's going to go through a 2 to 3 year pandemic, that would be a preposterous future. If we said that Ukraine was going to be invaded and that would interrupt European gas flows, that would typically be a preposterous future. So increasingly, the preposterous futures are becoming the actual futures, which then means that from a technology and trends perspective, we're now having to try to grapple with a lot of different wildcards, which then, again, from a C-suite perspective, just sends everyone into a tailspin because you don't know where to look. So I thought we'd start here. So with all of the investment managers that I work with, increasingly we see this development of 3 economies. We all know the physical economy. We're all familiar with the digital economy, you know, the Netflix and the subscriptions and all that kind of stuff. But increasingly we have the rising virtual economy. Virtual is not the same as digital. RPA and automation is our digital processes. For example, virtual is a completely different economy itself. So about 2 months ago, I was sitting down with the CEO of Adidas, and within a 3-hour period, they sold $35 million worth of virtual gear. And yet you have Christine Lagarde that says, when we have a look at things like digital assets and virtual assets, the vast majority of them are worthless. So we kind of live in this contradictory world where digital and virtual assets are seen by many as being worthless, but actually they have a tremendous value, whether it's to individuals, organizations, or young kids. Now, we also have the death of boundaries, which means that from a KPMG perspective, you're going to have a segmentation problem. Now, what I mean by this is when we actually have a look at how the vast majority of organizations behave, whether it's the large tech giants or whether it's the smaller tech giants or whatever it happens to be, we neatly arrange all the sectors by sector. The automotive sector, they make cars. The banking sector, they sell loans and finance and whatever it happens to be. The agricultural sector, well, they produce food and so on and so forth. But as all of these different organizations and sectors digitize, the boundaries between them all start eroding, which all of a sudden means that Mercedes, the car company, enters the payment space, buys Netflix so that it can stream entertainment to the pods that used to be cars that no longer actually have anything in them. And so when we talk about segmentation, and we'll see how this applies to TMT, we have an increasing problem because these segments no longer fit in nice silos like they used to. So how do you resource your teams basically when we're starting to talk to a car manufacturer, for example, or a telco basically about how they enter the payment space? Now, we also have speed. So this is Libra. It was launched in June 2019, went on to become Diem. It's a kind of cryptocurrency that was created by the then Facebook. In the words of the People's Bank of China, the European Central Bank, the US Federal Reserve, and the Chairman of the Bank of England, had the regulators trusted Facebook enough to actually launch this, and that was why Facebook failed, generally, this cryptocurrency could have been used by 100, 200, 300, 500 million people within the space of hours technically it could have been used by 2.5 billion people at the end of the day. So Libra as a cryptocurrency could have disrupted the entire global financial services system, as well as the state's control of money, overnight. So in an increasingly digital and connected world, we can disrupt industries at increasing speed. We can also disrupt behaviors at increasing speed, opinions, and so on and so forth. So from a board perspective, we are now trying to get our head around all these different trends and technologies and what they mean for our businesses and our markets and so on, but we're now having to spend less time trying to see them and figure them out because the pace of change is accelerating. But the pace of change is accelerating even faster. So if you're familiar with the term exponential technology, things like Moore's law for computer chips, where a computer chip doubles in price performance every 18 months. We now have Moore's law, for example, just generalizing, that's starting to slow down. So Moore's law really applies to hardware computer chips. MIT and Harvard recently created an artificial intelligence, along with Google, that designs new computer chips in simulation. The artificial intelligence designs a computer, a virtual computer, with a virtual computer chip. It then runs that computer within the artificial intelligence, which then means that that artificial intelligence can run a computer that is running another artificial intelligence. So we now have exponential technology because we have technologies like artificial intelligence that are now creating virtual, simulated products at light speed. We also have creative machines, artificial intelligences that are able to innovate. So from a hardware perspective, we're accelerating the rate of innovation as well and the pace of change. An example here, and there's lots of examples, is Toyota normally takes about 2 years to develop a new kind of electric vehicle battery and test it. However, using artificial intelligence, they created a completely new EV battery, a lithium-ion one, in 16 days and tested it. We have companies like InSilico, in Silicon Valley, where their artificial intelligence has created 35,000 kinds of new healthcare drugs in 21 days. So we have technology development, which is getting faster, but also the act of innovation, whether it's hardware, software, and so on and so forth, that is getting faster as well, which is then compounding the rate of change. Now, according to companies like ARK Investment, they estimate that emerging technology will destroy over $50 trillion worth of current GDP. However, they also believe that these same technologies will create up to $210 trillion of new GDP. An example of this is if you have a look at the oil and gas industry. The value in the oil and gas industry is being destroyed because we see the rise of renewable energy technologies. So we're moving from one old system and destroying the value associated with fossil fuels and creating new value. And we can replicate this across a whole variety of different industries. Now, when we have a look at technologies themselves, technologies as individual things are just blank slates. Left to themselves, they do absolutely nothing other than take up digital shelf space. But 3D printing technology is upending the $10 trillion manufacturing sector. We have people 3D printing cars, houses, and so on and so forth. In the healthcare sector, we have 3D printed human organs. So in Israel, they recently 3D printed a functional human heart that in about 10 years they estimate can be transplanted into people. Bioprinting, bioreactors solve global famine because we take the cell from an animal, put it into a bioreactor, and you create chicken nuggets, which KFC is selling. You create tiger burgers, zebra burgers. You create all kinds of different things. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are in the codexes. But you can see that when we start taking all these different technologies and combining them together, you change every single aspect of every part of human culture, business, and society. blockchain, new types of computing, quantum computers that are millions of times faster than traditional logic-based computers. However, in Manchester, they've developed biological computers, and a biological computer, based on the calculations that they've done, if packed into about a quarter of a test tube, will have more computing power than every single computer on the planet today. The Chinese are also on the 6th generation biological computer. So when you think about technology, everything that you think of as science fiction is already here. 5G, 6G, biocompatible electronics, which accelerate the development of brain-machine interfaces, grid-scale energy storage solutions, which help us move off fossil fuels faster, aerogels, which help us create new products that are 99% lighter than existing products, but 10 times stronger, and so on and so on and so forth. But this is the thing, when you start combining all these things together, these are your next generation products or services. This is your next smartphone, your next computer, your next building, whatever it happens to be. And every industry is being disrupted. We have agriculture, we have vertical farms, cellular agriculture coming through. So if you want to solve climate change, 20% of all greenhouse gases come from agriculture. We have a way to eliminate all of that. 70% of all global water use, fresh water use, is used by agriculture. We have a way to completely eliminate that. And that's what we do basically with the United Nations. When we have a look at the energy transition, we all know that, fossil fuels to renewables, but we have a lot of alternative energies and fuels coming through, such as ammonia and hydrogen. In the financial services space, we have robo-advisors, we have quantitative traders that are essentially artificial intelligent bots that are making bigger returns on the stock market than human traders. In healthcare, we have 3D printed organs, we have vaccines that we can now make in 7 minutes. We have in vivo gene editing. If you were born with an inherited genetic disease, we can use a technology called CRISPR to edit your genome while you are still alive, clip out the bad gene, clip in the good gene, and we have already demonstrated that it's effective on over 6,000 different incurable conditions. And then when we have a look at transportation, everything's going electric and autonomous. So every industry is being affected. But when we have a look at, for example, the TMT space relies on a large degree to all these different industries. All these industries are connected. So what happens in one affects the other. When we think about the metaverse, this is Coke. This is Coke Pixel. You can go into Roblox, buy a virtual can of Coke, drink it. It gives you an energy boost. Get a QR code, take that down to the local Sainsbury's store and pick up a can of Pixel. But from a business perspective, when you sort of start having conversations with CXOs about these things aren't even on their radars as things we should be looking out for. So Mercedes now has digital humans, which are lifelike replicas of real humans, selling their cars for them. With Nike, when we have a look at payments, because we can track you and because we have loads of sensors everywhere, the more you move, the more money Nike will give you that you can then refund to buy NFTs like this, or goods in the real world. So we have 5 digital products coming through. So when we have a look at payments, you can do anything to earn money. And then the concept of money changes because are we talking about money or are we talking about value? Because value exchange is different. So when we have a look at opportunity, opportunity is absolutely everywhere. It's the same thing with threats. Every threat to your clients' businesses is actually an opportunity to them. But we also have less time to figure out what this thing means, like the metaverse. The metaverse has been around for a long time, but it still doesn't actually have a dictionary definition. If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, there's no definition for the metaverse. But if you moved back, 1.5 years ago, and you said to execs, what's your point of view on the metaverse? They'd have gone, what? And then also the future is becoming a lot more complex because we have more trends that are impacting you directly or indirectly. We have more technologies that entrepreneurs who have more money are putting together to create new products and services and then throwing into the ether. Now, when we have a look at fintech, increasingly, the future of financial services organizations will look completely unrecognizable to what we have today. So when we actually have a look at, for example, picks and shovels, essentially the infrastructure that underpins a lot of our financial services systems today, we have open banking in the UK, which means that banks are able to transfer basic information between different banks, like account information, PFM information, that sort of stuff. We also have open finance coming through, particularly in Australia, which means that banks are then forced by the regulators to share all of the information that they have on individuals with other banks and other financial services providers. However, also coming out of Australia is open data. Now, when we have a look at open data, and these are typically driven by the regulators, this is where every single sector is increasingly required to have open data sets that are accessible via APIs that allow different sectors to access their data sets. So for example, a bank would now have natural access to your utility information, your healthcare information, maybe, et cetera, et cetera. But when we have a look at the picks and shovels, they're all changing. Increasingly, AML basically is driven by artificial intelligence. We have API aggregators. When we have a look at things like digital custodians, if you moved back 3 years ago, that wasn't really a part of the financial services ecosystem. So this is an increasingly new one. When we have a look at things like identity access management and KYC, it's all moving into the cloud, and then payments are being completely upended. Now, in the UK, the FCA is putting together something called the New Payments Architecture. Now, it's significant because it brings together things like BACS and all the other bits and pieces of the UK payments infrastructure. However, it's got built-in tracking. It's based on open data. So, for example, that means we have an open payment network. Real-time payments is probably the biggest benefit, and it's scalable. Now, when we have a look at the MPA architecture from your client's perspective, the fact that they can receive real-time payments now means that they have access to better liquidity, which then acts as an economic stimulus. So in the UK, it's estimated that just this one slide will add about $100 billion worth of GDP by 2026. Now, in Brazil, it's already added $35 billion. And when we have a look at India, it's already added $45 billion. So irrespective of the sector that you're actually talking to, if these sectors or the people you're talking to aren't aware of new MPA regulations and architectures, then they're probably missing out on a trick when it comes to things like liquidity. But again, when we have a look at banks, this is actually a company out of Silicon Valley called MetaFi, a metaverse bank built for social trading on Web3 in augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality. If you stepped back 2 to 3 years ago, you'd say that they're idiots. Now, whether they get people to use this, that's a different matter. But technology is letting us do new things in new ways. This is actually an increasingly well-funded startup. Whether it's successful or not, we will see. But it's a fundamentally different kind of financial service. And then when we have a look at fintechs, we know that they are DevOps first, digital native, cloud native, and all that kind of stuff. They get rid of the AS400 mainframes that a lot of the legacy banks basically are sort of scuppered with. But if you have a look at organizations like Starling Bank, they go, and you say to them, a little bit like Ocado as well, you say, you're a bank, aren't you? And they go, no. We are a technology platform. So banks like Starling Bank will sell you bank in a box that you can then use to start your own bank. Like Ocado. Ocado is not a grocery delivery company. It is a dark warehouse robotic automation company that happens to supply you with groceries. And increasingly, when you look at Ocado, they are making a huge amount of money selling their technology platform that happens to then sell you groceries as well. So this is where increasingly, when you look across different sectors, we are seeing many more organizations becoming platforms that they then wrap up in an OEM umbrella and then sell on to whoever it happens to be. So that's a new business model for a lot of these organizations. We have decentralized finance coming through. So peer-to-peer, I can lend you money, you can lend me money without any intermediaries. Social finance, super apps, which are taking off hugely in China and in the East. But in the West, super apps struggle with regulations. We have Web3, and then we've got centralized finance and decentralized finance now starting to come together, which basically if you're in the financial services industry or if you're the SEC is increasingly confusing, particularly when you start putting it against the backdrop of crypto and everything else that's going on. But when we look at decentralized finance, increasingly, as it applies to the media sector, Epic, Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, they are increasingly the perfect decentralized finance platforms. You can buy avatars, you can buy digital assets, you can buy NFTs, you can trade using things like crypto coins, etc., etc., etc. Epic makes 95% of all of its revenues from microtransactions. They have 350 million users. What happens if this game company that your children uses suddenly says, we're going to offer financial services, whatever those happen to be? Yeah, we've already seen the impact that this is actually having on things like share prices because they are building full stacks. And then you put the metaverse on top of it and everything else, and off we go. But when we have a look at things like money and value, there are a lot of investors, including Citi, whose building's over there, that believe that the token economy will be bigger than the entire global economy. So to put that into perspective, there are an increasing number of analysts and experts and banks that believe that the token economy could be worth over $100 trillion. Now, using this as a TMT example, for example, in the telco sector, what I could do is I could tokenize my cell phone tower, my 5G mast. I could then put that tokenized asset onto the Singapore Stock Exchange with a company called SDAX. People can then buy into my tokenized asset. So we now have the concept of fractional ownership. And if I sell services from that 5G tower, I make revenue from the 5G tower, the people who have a fractional share of that tower now make a dividend. Now, this is interesting because this also means that telcos, asset-heavy industries like the oil and gas giants, manufacturers, all that sort of stuff, can actually raise money, they can raise capital without having to go to a bank. So we cut out the middlemen. Plus, tokenization feeds really nicely into a decentralized finance world, which is generally where most of these things are headed, decentralization. Now, when we look at the technology sector, it's no secret that Meta is trying to line itself up as payment rails and as a financial services provider. They already have mobile commerce platforms, financing, NFTs, payments, PFM. They've got new rails for payments. They've also got rewards. So a little while ago, they bought a loyalty company. And then we've also got wallets as well. However, Meta keeps getting kicked in the nuts by the regulators. That's it. But if they were in China, this would be something like the long lines of Alipay. Now, when we look at the technology sector, you have to kind of ask the question, what sector or what companies that you deal with are not already technology companies? General Electric make giant turboprop fans and jet engines and wind turbines. But increasingly, they are a technology company with things like IoT and their big data products platforms. When we have a look at companies like, say, Ford, increasingly automotive manufacturers who used to just make vehicles now make software that they put into vehicles that are now just really smartphones on wheels. So what company is now not a technology company? Which is ironic because when you start reading up some of the literature, the people who have become CEOs of companies are increasingly CFOs and COOs. It's fairly rare to see a CIO get to the board. However, Goldman Sachs' CIO became CIO, CTO, CFO, and CEO. And they now have a huge amount of data scientists. So that affects things like succession. Now, when we have a look at the technology giants, especially they are digital by design. They're also designed to disrupt. Now, this is an important segue because we always tend to look at the technology giants like Amazon, for example, and think, well, you're digital, which means you can create a multi-sided platform and move from one industry to the other quite easily. Not necessarily seamlessly, but they can jump into new markets quite quickly. This is significant because when you have a look at it from a culture perspective, the tech giants look at other markets and go, how can we dominate that market? How many of your clients can say that they've looked outside of their sector and gone, we are going to dominate that market over here? Most of the people I speak to don't. They stick to their own lanes. And it's only when they start seeing revenues dipping or profits dipping or shareholder activism coming through that then they start looking at the new markets over here. So the tech giants are technology-led, but they're also culture-led, and that is important. Now, they've also had loads of failures. So, we always tend to look at the successes, but when we have a look at the failures, we've got Google Glass, we've got Google Loon, Nexus, Tango, which was kind of a modular smartphone, Meta. They failed on crypto completely. They've had loads of PR misfires, loads of social engineering disasters. But when we actually have a look at the failures of the tech giants, it's quite interesting to see that Google's failures, for example, are generally technology and execution. Meta's are cultural, really. They've got the technology, they know how to roll it out. They struggle a little bit sometimes with that, like the metaverse, but they have cultural misfires. However, the important thing is, though, while they have all these failures and these misfires, they actually try. So experimentation is the mother of invention, but dividends are the mother of invention in their case. So there is not a single technology giant out there that is not continuously pushing to try to move out of their market. And the reason for that is because they want to do new things in new ways, but they find new ways to disintermediate. So for example, if we look at Alexa, Alexa's this kind of cutie thing basically that allows us to order toilet roll basically with our voices. But it's a voice channel that ultimately disintermediates every single other sector, including healthcare. Because in the healthcare space, Alexa can listen to your voice, pick up a vocal biomarker and say, based on your vocal biomarker, I think you have COVID. And so what I've done is I've connected you to Amazon's telehealth doctors, and they're now available for you to actually have a conversation with, and we will prescribe you something or other. So increasingly, what they're trying to do is they're all trying to, in one way, control the user interface. Google via search, Meta via the metaverse, and so on and so forth. If you control customer eyeballs, if you control the interfaces, you make all of the other players redundant. It's like Apple. If you went to pay for goods, and all of a sudden you use your contactless, and the Apple system says, by the way, the Apple credit card is 0% APR today. Notice you were going to use your Visa card at 16.9% APR. Would you like to use the Apple card instead? And you just go, yeah. And it says, would you like me to automatically set your preferences to the Apple virtual card? Yeah. The tech giants have loads of different ways to disintermediate pretty much every single organization. But these also help them collect a whole host of new information. So when you actually have a look at the markets they're going into, they've kind of got dual purposes. So if you go to Apple and you go to a variety of other ones over in Silicon Valley and California, Apple have a clock on the wall in their innovation center. And when you sort of go, well, what's that? They go, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find ways to play a part in your life for the whole day. When you're sleeping, when you're awake, that kind of stuff. So this is why we sort of talk 24/7. It's like when Eric Schmidt was asked, why he started investing in smart toothbrushes. He went, because it gives us more information, because it means that Google are actually involved at the very start of your day in new ways. So what they're doing is Amazon as well with Jeff Bezos, they try to find core markets that are generally essential to our daily lives that we can't live without. Essential services to a degree. So entertainment, we all want to be entertained. Finance, we all need to pay for stuff. In healthcare, we all get broken. Insurance, because we generally all need to be insured for something or other. Retail, because we have a retail compunction. But then security, if you notice Google and Amazon are going into security, why did Amazon buy iRobot? Because it wants an autonomous robot company? Or is it because when the autonomous robot goes around your house, it's measuring the square feet of your house? So it knows basically that you live in a big house. And because you live in a big house, that means when Amazon starts showing you adverts on its platform, it says, you live in a big house. Maybe you need a bigger sofa, and so on and so forth. So what we have is they're trying to hook into your lives 24/7, but they're also trying to find new ways to get information. Things like the Nest cameras. We know who's turning up at your door. We know who your friends are, and so on and so forth. So we're trying to hook into your life 24/7, but we're trying to find new ways to get even more data that we can crunch about you, which then feeds the entire monster. Then when we have a look at the metaverse, the reason why Meta is now spending, what, $6 billion building the metaverse? It's not because they just think it's a fun thing. It's because if you think about Meta's position in the world today, same a little bit with Microsoft, but sort of much more so than Meta. Today, Meta owns your news feed, some payment systems and everything else. What happens when you start building an entire city in the metaverse, complete with all of its services? So one of my clients basically is the Dubai royal family. They are putting Abu Dhabi into the metaverse and Dubai. So imagine what happens. You build a Dubai metaverse city on Meta's platform. It has social services, information, it's got financial services and payments, commerce, all this kind of stuff. At some point, the Abu Dhabi royal family go, we are going to move off the Meta platform. Oh, actually everything just broke because the rendering is different on Microsoft's metaverse or whatever it happens to be. This gives Meta the opportunity to own an entire world from the top of the stack to the bottom of the stack. It is the ultimate lock-in, the ultimate data set. Now, when we have a look at media, lots of things happening in the media space. So increasingly, media organizations basically are in the direct-to-consumer model. We've seen that with over the OTT streaming. We're seeing the democratization of content as well as distribution. So for example, if I want to be a TV channel, do TV channels even exist any longer if we all watch on tablets? But if I want to be a TV channel, I just do live stream via my YouTube, which I could actually do with my laptop over there. So I become a broadcaster. Emerging technology. Most people are afraid of emerging technology because they don't necessarily understand what it is, what its purpose for, why they can use it, or how their competitors can use it. We're seeing massive moves basically in the IP and rights space. And the reason for that is when you have a look at companies like Sony have been creating virtual influencers, but also virtual pop stars. So who owns the rights to the virtual pop stars' music, identity, and everything else? So I do a lot of work with the law firms like Dentons, Allen & Overy, those kinds of guys, and they aren't really sure what to do in this particular space. When we have a look at the metaverse, we actually had, it was Gucci, I believe, sued a creator who copied one of their handbags. He copied a handbag and just made it fluffy. And they said, that looks a lot like our handbag, we're going to sue them. But there were no regulations or laws in place for copyright in the metaverse. So they're generally worried about that. When we have a look at new competitors, there are new competitors everywhere. You know, if I went back to the BBC and said 10 years ago, by the way, you're going to be less relevant than this bloke called Dewey Pie over in the US, they'd be going, who? What? He's going to take down an entire sovereign news call, entire sort of, take down the UK broadcasters? I don't think so. Yeah, that's it. And then synthetic content. So synthetic content is coming whether you like it or not. Now that offers a huge amount of opportunity basically for people in the media sector for a variety of reasons. But we also kind of get into this. Is the content that we're watching, is it real? There was a set of images, video images of an F-35 doing amazing acrobatics. And when you have a look at these things on LinkedIn, people are going, is that real? So we are already in the space of, is that thing real? Is it fake? So has someone just actually made the content, or has an artificial intelligence made the content, or is it faked? Because there's a difference between all these different things. This is where we try to fake information for duplicitous purposes, like Zelensky, the Zelensky deepfakes. Everyone lay down their arms. Fantastic, I'll do that. But at the moment, when we have a look at things like deep fakes, you can still generally spot them. However, in about 2 years' time, it's estimated you won't be able to spot them, which then has a significant impact on can we trust one another? Because at the moment, if you go onto Google or any of these different sort of services that we have access to, if you see a piece of news or whatever, you go, I generally think that that's probably real. But what happens to trust and democracy, as well as the fabric of society, when you can no longer trust any of the information that you see? It leads into a polarized society and the failure of democracy, which the regulators are definitely nowhere near getting their heads around. Now, when we talk about creating new content in new ways, we've got things like the Unreal engines, because the Unreal engines are now the gaming engines are now starting to get so good, so photorealistic, that we don't need to create a set over there in London. We don't need a building like this. We can just create everything synthetically. Now, when we have a look at the speed of production, remember everything is speeding up. It took decades for the James Bond franchise to hit 24 movies. So I do a lot of work with Disney. This is accelerating. This is the speed at which Disney is using new and emerging technologies to create new movies. And they are now rapidly accelerating away. So everything points to speed. One of the reasons why Disney can get so many movies out is because it's increasingly using virtual production, Unreal engines, and all sorts of other things. So this is The Mandalorian. So this was sort of pioneered by John Trudeau, ironically, basically with the Jungle Book. But this is actually just the Unreal engine. So they create these virtual worlds, and then they have different rigs and everything else around. However, it also starts affecting sort of more basic content. We talk about movies, but these things start at the high level and start coming down to consumers. If Ferrari wanted to do an advert historically, they'd find an open road. But now we're using the Unreal engines again. The car's going nowhere. It's a game engine workflow. And increasingly, if you think about children sort of saying, yeah, in the future I want to be an actor, increasingly most actors are just in front of a green screen. If you go and have a look behind the scenes of the Marvel productions, they just have acrobats, basically, and everything else flying in front of green screens. There is not a single set or exotic place anywhere. But this also speeds up production again. It makes production cheaper. So again, we use technology to get faster, to do new things in new ways. And then when we have a look at this, one of my clients is MPC. They did The Lion King. This was the first of its kind, because what they did is they created the whole African savanna, everything, every blade of grass, every animal, every sunset in the gaming engines. And then what they did is once they had these, they turned these sets into virtual reality in the game engine. And to get the images of the giraffes running around, they had virtual reality tracked camera rigs, and they would bend down. And they would film different angles. So you had cameramen who, with virtual reality headsets on, who were then tracking all the animals. At no point did the makers of The Lion King ever set foot in Africa. And this is relatively photorealistic. It won Grammy Awards, it won Oscars. But this is the thing. When these game engines, which sit in the media sector, that you might not actually be targeting at the moment, start creating content that is photorealistic and indistinguishable from the real thing, this becomes the de facto way that we produce movies. This is now increasingly the way that companies like Disney and other Hollywood studios produce content. However, in the long term, are the game companies the victors? There's actually another way that we can produce content. So when we actually have a look at things like content workflows, basically we've got humans with dumb tools, humans with smart tools, creating hybrid, which is a mix of real and synthetic content together, or just creating synthetic content like we saw with The Lion King. However, we have this classification here, creative machines. So creative machines are a kind of artificial intelligence, something called a generative adversarial network. And increasingly, these creative machines can put together all kinds of content that can then either be hybrid or synthetic. However, they can also create procedural content. So for example, we've already got AIs that are creating procedural podcasts that are never the same again, procedural music, and so on and so forth. Netflix is after this. Now, when we actually have a look at the general stack, basically within the media industry, we've got 235 million jobs being affected by all these different technology changes, $6 trillion worth of GDP. If you want an artificial intelligence to make a genuine piece of content for you, just by pushing a button, it needs to know lots and lots of different things. So this was designed by MPC. This is Blade Runner 2049. But the AI needs to know the laws of nature for the fire, for the special effects. It needs to know what elements to put into the scenes. It needs to know materials and textures. If it's creating vehicles, it needs to know what kind of vehicle, for what purpose, what does it look like? If we talk about characters, what's the type of the character, male, female, binary, whatever it happens to be? What are their behaviors? What are their clothing? What's their presence? How do they walk? How do they interact with other sort of characters basically in the set? What's the script? What's the start of the movie look like? What's the end of the movie look like? What's the plot line? The whole lot. So what we have at the moment, though, is this. We have lots and lots of different startups, as well as established organizations like the BBC, who are increasingly trying to eat away at each different part of the movie making or content making process. So we've got organizations that have artificial intelligences that can make any kind of audio that you want, whether it's for conversational artificial intelligence like Google, where you can't tell that it's not a real person speaking because they stutter and whatever it happens to be. We've got studios like MPC, as well as Digital Domain, putting together characters of all kinds. Sony has spent $250 million on digital characters because they know that the future of media and entertainment is increasingly virtual, and the ability to control the virtual pop star who never does anything naughty. We've got imagery, basically from companies like NVIDIA. We've got text generators from companies like OpenAI. Bearing in mind, if you want to create a script, we can then take that script and use transcoders to then turn that into either a video or imagery. We've got synthetic video coming through with companies like Stanford, virtual reality again with organizations like NVIDIA, where you take a video of something and it's translated instantly into virtual reality. Or we have companies like Promethean AI that you talk to the engine and you say, I want you to create me a virtual reality world, and it just goes off, that looks like this, and it goes and creates it. So this is the democratization. If I want to create a virtual reality world or a game, I just talk to the artificial intelligence using a new behavioral interface and say, create a game that looks like this. And the AI goes off and makes it. So all of these are increasingly powerful. Now, this is the Hollywood studio movie flow. And as you can see, color grading is pretty much fully automated now. But this is the genuine workflow used by the Hollywood studios to create some of the world's biggest blockbusters. The green lines are how far along we are in automating these different sectors. And as you can see, there is not a single part of the content workflow that doesn't have some green in it. Because the studios, the content creators, whether it's Dewey Pie, whatever it happens to be, are trying to automate the whole lot. Because once they automate it, they can churn out movie after movie after movie for very little cost. And then when we actually have a look at some of the primary use cases, why would we want to use an automated system or a machine to create content? There's loads. So for example, when we have a look at 4, by creating an artificial intelligence that can create really good audio, like human speech, we get conversational interfaces that Google really want for their home assistants, that Alexa and Amazon really want. When we have a look at, so there's not a single piece of content that isn't being affected, but they're all starting down here, so high impact, but the maturity is fairly low. Over the next sort of 5 years, all these different use cases are going to increase to the point where, for example, with gaming, you have AIs creating games, movie generation, music. Warner Brothers have bought artificial intelligences that make music. Why? Because they can make millions of tracks and they can just thump it out. Report writing in the scientific community, synthetic celebrities, Sony are investing huge amounts in that. When we have a look at things like teaching and training, we've got Will from Soul Machines, a synthetic human that has taught 250,000 children about renewable energy. So if you can start cracking content, bearing in mind I can control your worlds and your opinions and your beliefs by controlling two things, pixels and sound. I can change all of your opinions, generally. This is transformative. We have scripts created by artificial intelligence that won awards. This is from Lexus. But the AI was told or asked to make an award-winning car advert. What it did is it looked at all of the car adverts out there that had won awards and figured out that this advert is good because it has this kind of emotion, it's this kind of mood, this kind of feeling. And then it wrote a script. But increasingly, while a human shot the footage, we have AIs that can create the video for it as well. We have platforms like DALL-E. So Cosmopolitan's recent cover was created by an artificial intelligence. You write what you want the OpenAI DALL-E system to produce, and it will create the content. The other day, the world's leading sort of award ceremony for fine art was awarded to an artificial intelligence that created literally a masterpiece. It's quite crazy. But we move basically from static images to artificial intelligences that can create generative images and generative video. Now apply this to the fashion industry, to the metaverse industry, to the movie industry, the content industry, to microbloggers and influencers and all that sort of stuff. What happens when I say, create a video short of a woman in a dress walking around a garden, changing clothes? Yeah. These are getting better all the time. We also have AIs out of Russia that have been creating complete campaigns for companies. But the companies didn't know that it was an artificial intelligence creating their marketing campaigns. And then they were a bit surprised. We've got democratized distribution because we can all be on TV and have our own TV channel. And then we have automated distribution with platforms like IBM Watson that decides where to send all this stuff. And then finally, when we look at things like telecoms, in the telecom sector, they care about automation. So this is where we look at 5G, moving to 6G. Cloud native networks, this is a massive work of progress, basically for companies like Ericsson, because we want to create an end-to-end network that is cloud native. Connectivity everywhere, obviously. Edge and IoT, obviously. Geopolitics increasingly plays a role in the telecom sector because we're now seeing China split the 5G standards with companies like Huawei, which then means that the 5G Huawei standard will not work with the Nokia Ericsson 5G standard, which then kind of gives us an issue. We then also see China starting to sell its technology along with its Belt and Road Initiative. So there are 30 memorandums of understanding with countries that if China gives them money, then they are predicated to use Chinese technology. So you're now starting to see a bifurcation of global technology standards, which has an impact. And then from a telco space, they all care about spectrum because it's really expensive and it's increasingly congested and crowded and everything else. And in the US, they actually just sold the rights to 7G spectrum. And people are going, we don't even know what that thing is yet. So spectrum is increasingly the war, particularly as we start looking at global communications platforms. Now, top of mind, basically for all of the telcos, business model innovation, value-add services. So for example, we sell a 5G service, a 5G thing What value-add services can we wrap around it? And then why 5G? So I work with organizations like Deutsche Telekom, T-Mobile, and all that kind of stuff. And increasingly, the question they ask is, what is 5G's killer app? What can 5G do that Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 7 can't, or 4G can't? And we do actually have a variety of different answers. But while a lot of the players in the telco space are afraid of commoditization and disintermediation, you have organizations like AT&T and Verizon, as well as T-Mobile, going on the offensive. So they have content partnerships. If you look at AT&T, they own Warner Brothers and CNN. So a lot of these organizations don't want to become that dumb pipe. But when you actually go and have conversations with them, like Vodafone, for example, Vodafone aren't too sure what they really want to be, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But companies like AT&T are going, well, let's be a multi-sided platform. Let's see if we can hook into every part of your life. Payments and then services are the natural places to go. Now, when we have a look at fiber, because increasingly 5G lets you go over the top with broadband, when we look at the backhauls out of Japan, we now have terabit fiber, 4-core terabit fiber, that can run at 1.2 petabits a second. So when we think that we're all going to unhook from the fiber in the ground and just go straight to space or straight to 5G for different things, fiber's not out yet. When we have a look at things like space internet, we've got OneWeb, we've got Amazon, we've got the Chinese government, we've obviously got Starlink, all vying for space internet platforms. So when you have a look at Starlink, for example, it's estimated that's a $36 billion business for Elon Musk. They're signing contracts all over the place. The FCC's approving them all over the place. They're launching 12,000 satellites into space. Increasingly, this means that from an addressable market opportunity, if you are a company like Netflix or Disney, and I've had these conversations where you say, so space internet is going to connect up to 7, or connectivity, by 2030, we can see how we can connect 7.5 billion people on the planet to stuff. But when we talk about siloed thinking, companies like Disney will go, and what? Well, we just doubled your total addressable market opportunity. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's good. These systems are designed to run at about 1.5 gig, and increasingly, the base stations on planet Earth are cellular as well, which is why companies like T-Mobile are hooking into them, so that now you can snap selfies in the Rockies and you can now text those selfies or post those selfies to social media. So we're now starting to see the hybridization where 5G telcos are coming together with space-based internet systems. And then when we have a look at this, super fast, the 5G dilemma, you know, why 5G, why not Wi-Fi 6 and 7? When we move to 5G, we can all end downloads of apps, because we just stream everything from the cloud. When we look at things like the metaverse, for example, we are already, via NVIDIA, able to stream augmented reality and virtual reality worlds directly from the cloud. So 5G's killer app is generally believed to be immersive technology. That's what we generally think the killer app is, as a broad brush. However, when we talk about emerging technology, and when we talk about immersive technologies, we've got augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality. However, these only really play to two senses, sight and sound. When you have a look at mixed reality, what we call MXR, MXR is where we start bringing the other senses into our world. So for example, with haptic suits from companies like Tesla Suit, not related to Tesla, if I high-five you, you can feel a high five. Yeah? If I poke you, you can feel me poking you. If you want to feel the fabric of the IKEA sofa that you're looking at on the website, you can do that. So MXR, when we start looking at some of the more extreme 5G use cases, 5G NR, this is where we encode sensory information. So for example, if you have a haptic glove, I can have an augmented reality headset or glasses or whatever it happens to be. I throw you a ball, you catch it, you can feel that you're catching the ball. So the digitization of physical presence and the creation of completely new kinds of gameplay. Now, when we think about virtual reality, especially, we all think these giant headsets. These giant headsets, courtesy of companies like Meta, Panasonic, as well as a bunch of others, are going away. Harvard created something called a meta lens. It's an atom-thin lens that means that you can see in high definition. So when we put meta lenses into standard sunglasses, you now have ultra high definition virtual reality on your face. Now, when we start getting rid of the Oculus controllers as well, we have something called EMG rings. Now, these rings sense the muscle movements in your fingers. So if I went to your IT teams and said, I think that in about 2 to 3 years' time, you should no longer give everybody a laptop. You should give them a pair of sunglasses and a ring. They go, well, you're stupid, for a start. But we've already got horizon spaces. We can already work in virtual reality. And I wrote some of the books in virtual reality, whereas hanging in space, which is a weird thing. But nevertheless, if getting into a virtual reality office like Accenture's 11th floor is suddenly as easy as putting on some sunglasses and then using an EMG ring that understands where your hands are, what would you rather have? A traditional company laptop with one screen, or access to an entire world where you could have 5 screens, and courtesy of Stanford, you could have a third hand that comes out of your chest. And apparently, when they actually start training people to use this third hand, productivity improved 30%. People went, it's a bit difficult to get the hang of. But what now happens if you're a crane operator or something like that, and you now have 3 hands in virtual reality? So when we look at the future of work and productivity and everything else, we start getting into odd conversations. But as the technology that lets us access virtual worlds, whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality, and so on and so forth, starts getting more invisible, easier to use, cheaper, and so on and so forth, is this your future office? Virtual reality therapy. In the US, we're already using virtual reality to help improve therapy outcomes for patients. We're also starting to use 5G for things like teleoperations and robotics, both in India, China, the UK, as well as the US, which then means I can be a surgeon standing here, and I can be doing heart surgery and neurosurgery, which has already been done, on somebody in Delhi or Cape Town. I can do stents. So continuous innovation. So this is a killer use case, basically for 5G. Verizon doesn't know anything about it, but this is sort of what I wrote up for T-Mobile. So if you think about this, what we have in your cars is we have lots of sensors in your vehicles. So I put some sensors into your things. Those sensors stream information back to a creative artificial intelligence. The creative artificial intelligence understands what you're doing with this product, this car. It understands you're driving it through a load of potholes. So the creative artificial intelligence designs a better shock absorber. It's a digital simulated shock absorber. It pushes that to a BMW digital twin factory made by Siemens that then optimizes the manufacturing of that new shock absorber. And once it's happy with the optimization, it pushes the manufacturing process for that shock absorber directly to the real factory floor. When we talk about continuous innovation, when you start combining sensors that stream data with artificial intelligences or people that can now use that data to create new products that can then push that via digital twins to Industry 4 sort of factories, you fundamentally change how we innovate and how quickly we innovate stuff. And then when we have a look at things like remote operation.
We had a young woman with an acute heart attack. The total transfer time to get her to our hospital was 3 hours. There's a feeling of helplessness as a physician that you know what the treatment is to limit their chance of death, but you can't get to them.
Our hypothesis is that if we implement remote robotics in its full capacity, we will change the lives for hundreds of thousands of patients in the US and millions around the world.
Using technologies like 5G networks and robotic systems to provide cardiac care at a distance and be able to do telestenting has the potential to change the landscape of medicine. 5G technology really opens up the possibility to do these over longer distances with minimal delays in signal and transmitting greater amounts of data.
Being able to reach a patient hundreds of miles away to deliver the care they need when they need it is one of the most disruptive things happening in the medical industry.
5G helps us decentralize almost every kind of job. We have construction workers in Germany that are using 5G technology in drone vehicles to make buildings in South Korea. When we look at 6G, 6G is already on the table. It's increasingly driven by artificial intelligence and distributed ledger technologies like blockchain. Isogun, so 6G, unlike 5G, goes up to 10 kilometers into the atmosphere. So this is where we hook in things like urban air mobility vehicles, drones, pseudo-satellites, and so on and so forth. Increasingly, 6G standards will be linked in with quantum technologies, so quantum communication, quantum internet technologies, which are generally thought of as being unhackable, and it will obviously be software defined. However, one of the biggest problems that we have with 5G, and we are going to have this problem with 6G, is antennae, because 5G signals are blocked by walls, for example, if you talk about 5G NR and millimeter wave. However, this is where we already have a whole variety of new types of antenna coming through, including DNA antenna. So for example, I could put a DNA-based antenna into clothing and you are now a 6G receiver. Fluidic, so these fluidic antennae basically can be embedded into sofas, into smartphones and everything else. And then we have metamaterials as well, which tune themselves. Now when we have a look at things like 6G use cases, there's all kinds. I've got like 240 6G use cases which were developed for the IEEE organizations and everything else. But if you look at some of these ones up here, so these are the extreme ones. You've got things like telesurgery, you've got persistent threat detection, 360 streaming, you've got holographic communications, which Samsung really loves. You've got sensory Internet of Things networks, pervasive surveillance. So you also have things like spatial surveillance as well, because what happens when we can stream all of the information from a city, piece it together in a digital twin or a meta twin, and all of a sudden have a real-time interpretation of the security posture of your entire smart city. And we've got loads. And then finally, as we start sort of looking at 7G, bearing in mind some of the spectrum's already been sold, this is where we might start making the transition to what we call quantum communications. So we already have quantum communication satellites being spun up, particularly in China again, as well as Austria. So quantum communications are generally unhackable because of the way that quantum weirdness works. But when we have a look at quantum communications, they are playing an essential role in securing fully autonomous vehicles. Because if you want to prevent a fully autonomous vehicle from being hacked, you go to a company like SRI and you buy quantum key distribution systems that are beamed from space. And that is it. So I hope you kind of enjoyed that. As I say, lots of different things are changing. That was kind of a sheep dip, believe it or not. So it was very dense, but hopefully you sort of saw some new things. It got you sort of thinking about some new things and new ways and everything else. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.